Hello my dears, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing a bit of a pattern review from a dealer on Etsy. It is Repeated Originals, and today we are going to be working on a slip from 1939. Now I've chosen this pattern today because I have recently been going through my stash and realized how many beautiful 1930s and 1940s patterns that I have, and I would really like to make a few of these dresses. Unfortunately, I realized after going through them that many of them require significant slips, but they're just absolutely beautiful, beautiful patterns, Hollywood patterns. And this one in particular, this is the one that kind of really sparked the need for this video today, which is this particular pattern, Madeleine Carroll dress from Hollywood Patterns. And you can see so clearly in this particular pattern how you can see the underslip through the dress. This is actually pretty common for the time period, and that is because the fabrics that were chosen for these patterns, many were very, very light and a little bit see-through, a bit sheer. Things like cotton voiles and satins and even some tools and sheer fabrics are called for back here in the fabric recommendations. So they anticipated, or there was a knowledge that you needed a very good foundational garment because it would be able to be seen through the dress. Now, depending on the type of fabric that you chose would inherently determine how visible a slip would be underneath, but nonetheless, you knew that you wanted to have a very good foundational garment that was really beautiful that could be seen through with these lighter fabrics. You don't want it to take over. This isn't meant to be slinky or overly sexy, but you want it to be there and just sitting gently against your body to create a more solid appearance with these lighter fabrics. So I did go through my own stash of patterns to see if I had a slip before I went on Etsy and purchased from Repeated Originals. And unfortunately, I didn't have a pattern for a slip from that time period. I don't know if it's simply because there weren't a lot of slip patterns. It was something that was probably already considered to be in your wardrobe, or maybe something that many, many people already knew how to make. And so really, if you were going to be spending extra money on a pattern, it was likely to be on a beautiful dress pattern, such as one of these Hollywood patterns. This is what you'd want to spend your money on. You could ask your grandma how to make a slip. But since I wanted to be really accurate, I did go on a hunt. I went on a hunt. I Googled it, and then I went on Etsy and I went through quite a few dealers to find a slip that specifically said it was from the 30s and 40s, as many of these patterns are from the 30s and 40s, and I wanted it to be accurate. On Repeated Originals, now they actually have a really lovely shop with many, many patterns to choose from. I chose this specific one because it was a 3-part pattern, comes with a nightgown and combinations as well as a slip. And I'm more focused on the slip in this particular pattern. I had considered combinations for a short period of time, but I am concerned about bathroom breaks. I love the idea of having combinations, but many times it was a one-piece outfit. It wasn't a top and a pair of shorts. It was a pair of shorts that was connected, and I don't really want to have to completely strip down in the restroom. So I'm going with the plain slip. I also think it will create a lovely feature under a dress because then you're less likely to have the fabric go between your legs when you're walking, etc. So that's what we're going to focus on. When you print out this, because it is a PDF pattern that you print out and you put it all together and then cut the pieces out, you do also get all of the pieces lined up with which pattern you're looking for. And then there's another sheet that has like some a brief amount of information, maybe some instructions. Unfortunately for me, the dealer for Repeated Originals, I'm guessing is Dutch or German or Danish. because it looks like a Germanic language on here, and unfortunately I don't speak any of those Germanic languages, and so I'm not really sure about instructions for this. Instead, I'm going to just give it a go. I'm going to attempt to utilize the pattern with the knowledge that I already have, which I think is also what many people from this time period may have done, is they would have relied on the knowledge that they had passed down to them from other family members who were sewing before them. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to get this put together. I chose a lovely thick crepe back satin in a baby pink, and I chose that as opposed to going with a white or a taupe or a brown or a black, because I felt like it would be a nice neutral underneath without being a nude. I also find it extraordinarily difficult to find shades that would really be considered a nude for me, and so you would be able to see a tan or a taupe underneath the garment, and I'm guessing that I'm not going to want my garments to have kind of that undertone to them, so I did go ahead and go with baby pink. The reason I chose a crepe back satin, a little bit heavier satin, is because I want the slip to have a little bit of weight. It is still a satin, so a dress should come around it nicely, and it shouldn't be bulky underneath the garment, but I want it to be heavy enough and sturdy enough that it stays down and stays in place. And I am very hopeful that the material that I picked out for this particular project will work for that. So without further ado, let's dive right into this pattern review and make ourselves a slip from 1939. Let's get stitching, guys.
After putting together the main panels of the slip, I did put it on the dress form to check the fit, and unfortunately noticed that there was a gap in the back, and so you can see here I am adding a back panel to the slip.
All right, my dears, so I got this far on the slip last night. It's a little bit wrinkly, and I was feeling pretty good about it on the dress form, as you can see here, and so I decided to go ahead and do a quick test fit. And I was so frustrated. First of all, these points here, they don't quite hit me in the right spot, and I feel like they look a little ridiculous. That is how they are set up in the pattern that is very classic of patterns from this period, and so I think it's just the way it is for that. I may choose to maybe do a lace overlay or a ribbon overlay in order to make things a little bit smoother, look a little bit nicer, but I'll have to figure that out later. The big problem I'm having with this pattern and with this slip so far is something I have come across in a couple of other slips from this time period, and that's this. Whoop. So when I put it on, it was terrible, gaping side boob, not good, not flattering, and I was really frustrated. And I tried, like pulling the straps all the way up, like letting them down and letting the slip fall further down, and it's sitting where it needs to sit for the waist and the hips and everything. And so I think the biggest thing is that just this design creates that gap of fabric that sticks out that I absolutely hate. So I decided to just go to bed, and I gave in, and I couldn't figure it out. I didn't know what exactly to do. I attempted like some pleats and stuff as well, or just thought about like nipping fabric out here, continuing this line all the way up to make it like a princess seam, and I just didn't really like any of them. And then the next morning I was getting dressed and I put on a camisole that I have that actually looks strikingly like our slip here, like our two-piece here. The top of it is remarkably the same, and it's a modern day camisole. And I was like, why does my modern day camisole not have side boob, but this slip does? And I really looked at it and dissected it, and I realized it's exactly the same. But look, ta-da! My modern day camisole has a bit of elastic through here, and it does exactly what that string just did effectively. It just tucks it up, and it's a really tiny piece of elastic, and I think it might be fed into the finishing that comes around the edge of it, because it's got like some piping around the edge of it, and so the gathering isn't even this dramatic. And once you kind of space it out over this whole area, really the gathering doesn't have to be dramatic, but what it's going to effectively do is bring this into the body and make it fit better and get rid of that side boob. So I did run to the store because I did not have any elastic that was small enough. And I did just pick up this kind of tiny 1/8 of an inch braided elastic. And my hope is that it will be small enough that I can just put it here and it's going to just nip that side in beautifully. And we can either do a rolled hem over it in the original fabric, or I can do a little bit of piping, and voila, we are going to be back on track for getting this 1930s, 1940s slip done.
Alright, my dears, I thought I would do a quick check-in. I also made a bunch of bias binding to go around the entire top, and I've done it across the back. The bias binding was very simple. I simply found the bias, I cut a piece of fabric off, folded it over, and cut strips, and then sewed them together. I had also done bias binding around the front as well, which you may be able to see the stitch lines here. And I got it done and I pressed it and I was ready to put the straps on and be done with this project and really have it in the bag and ready to use. And I decided I did not like it at all. I tried it on and it didn't feel like it was going to lay really flat and beautiful. And in particular on the sides where I did need to take the material in, there is some gathering, and it just created like a big bunching underneath the bias binding. And I really felt if I left the slip that way, it was going to be something that I would regret and that I would be frustrated about, and that I wouldn't want to wear the slip under those dresses, which would defeat the purpose of doing this. So I decided to go to bed because just like I did with other parts of this project and with so many projects, honestly, this is something as I have gotten older, I have found to be a good thing for me. Sometimes if something is not working, I have an instinct to just keep attacking it and keep pinching it and trying to do different things with it. And inevitably in the past, I have ruined entire garments just trying to fix them, instead of taking a moment and walking away and seeing what my brain comes up with when it has a little bit of downtime. So I did hang the slip up with the bias binding on around the entire top. I went to bed. I thought, maybe I'll love it in the morning and it'll be fine. And I didn't. I thought it was pretty terrible. But in the interim, I really stopped to think about what was going to work for this garment. Something that was going to allow the slip to lay really flat and beautiful, but to have a finished look. And I was so caught up on the images that they had in the pattern, making it look like it had to be this thick binding or this thick trim, that when I was initially doing it, I couldn't move past that and see what to me now seems like a very obvious choice, which is to simply line the top of the slip, or really just to do like an interfacing for it. So taking the pattern itself and on a thin, soft fabric, either a thinner satin, because I don't know that I want to double up this satin. It's a pretty thick satin crepe, or a crepe back satin. And to trace out the pattern just for this top portion, not very wide, and to go ahead and stitch that on and then flip it and do some top stitching, just so that the top stitching is very, very thin, is going to ensure that I can maintain the points here, the point here at the center, but in doing the interfacing, I can make it lay really, really flat. Versus in bias binding, you're taking that material or the ribbon and it's folded over once, and then the two sides are folded in, and really by the time you end up, you have 5 pieces of fabric, which creates a substantial amount of bulk that I didn't really like for this garment. Versus doing an interfacing should keep it very thin, very light, very sleek, and it should work pretty well around these areas where we've added the elastic as well. All right, my dears, I did go ahead and go through my fabric, and I had not initially wanted to do the interfacing with the same fabric just because of how thick this particular satin is. But in going through my fabric, I didn't really feel like I had any other materials that I thought were going to really lay nicely with this, that weren't going to become overly wrinkled or weren't going to bunch underneath it and so forth. And so I am going to just use the original fabric, even though I said I didn't want to, because while it will be a little bit thicker, I think it's still better for it to be thicker than to be the wrong fabric altogether. So that's what we're going to do. And I am going to go ahead and cut the material out with my pinking shears to help minimize fraying. And luckily for me, in the fabric that I purchased for this, I did have it off cut. As you could just see, that was enough fabric for me to do the interfacing here. All right, we've got that. Pop that back with the rest of our pattern pieces. And then we can go ahead and take a look at, you can see all my bias binding scraps. That's ridiculous. Ah, waste of time. So what I think I would like to do is, see, do I even need to? I think I'm going to just open the sides up just a little bit so that I can really lay the interfacing in, and then I can just stitch it right back up and closed after the interfacing has been flipped and set into place. There has been for this pattern a significant amount of seam ripping that has occurred, and it has been entirely of my own doing. In fact, the last 2 things I've made, the linen dress and this slip, I have in both situations made my life harder than I needed to by second guessing myself and second guessing the pattern and not doing the obvious thing, which is kind of a bummer. I think most of us want to get to a point when we're doing things, especially things that we love, like hobbies and so forth, where we're like, I know what I'm doing. I super know what I'm doing. And then lo and behold, we have an entire day or a project or a couple of projects in a row where we're kind of like in a slump and in a funk, and we do everything in our power to get in our own way and make our lives harder by second guessing ourselves, which is definitely what I've done. This is something I am struggling with this as well. I put this elastic in, and I do think it was a good idea, but I'm having to stretch it as I put the bias binding around. I had to stretch it, and now as I'm doing this, I'm having to stretch it, and I'm wondering if that's going to be part of the problem. versus I wonder if I rely on the fact that I can kind of wiggle my shoulders into it, like I really don't need this extra space. If I just sew it flat, like sew the, which then I guess defeats the purpose of having the elastic. I could have just maybe nipped it in with some gathering. We're going to try and stretch it. We're going to try and do the stretch and sew method. And we're going to see what happens. Because I've already had to rip the seams out of this like a half a dozen times, so what's the difference? It's all good. All right, my dears, it's time to review our pattern from Repeated Originals. This is our slip from 1939, and if you remember from the beginning of the video, I am making this slip not just to review a pattern from an online Etsy dealer, but because I would very much like to utilize some of the patterns that I have in my stash of patterns from the 1930s and 1940s, many of which require a lovely slip to have on underneath them because they are made of fabrics that are quite thin, georgettes and cotton voiles, silks and satins, and you really do need to have this good foundational garment because in many of these fabrics you will see through the gown itself and the slip will be visible, and so you really wanted to have a very nice looking slip. So for this particular pattern, I thought it was kind of interesting that I purchased the wrong size, and as a result I did have to add this back panel here for the slip in order to make it fit. And now this slip is not really tight fitting on me, it is fitting loosely, and I did that because I think really that's how it's closer to how it's supposed to fit. But as I work with more patterns and so forth, if I do need to take this in, of course the beautiful thing is that I can take it in through this back area here. But the interesting thing was with this is that the front of the dress actually fit very, very well. It was mostly just the back that there was quite a gap over my bum and my back end. So I don't know, maybe I really did pick the correct size based on my bust size and my front measurements, but I just needed a little bit more because I'm a bit pear-shaped. That's okay, right? We're all a little bit different. So adding that back panel did work really beautifully for me because I did really need more width in this bottom portion than I did up here. I did go ahead and go with kind of a mermaid cut on that insert. So you see that has that fishtail look. Also gives it just a little bit of volume at the base, which looked correct for the pictures that they had there. This style here, very popular. It's actually similar to that corselet that we made, well, gosh, maybe about a year ago now, where it comes across, and at first I didn't love it. And I learned after making that pattern that because I had been using a knit fabric, I could have top stitched some of those pieces. And knowing that I could have top stitched those pieces and that it was popular, or I guess normalized at the time, to top stitch portions over things like slips and undergarments of the time period, I decided to utilize that same method for this. Now initially I did try to simply put the two pieces together, sew it, and then flip it the correct way out, and it created this terrible pucker that was really, really awful. And I'm glad that I remembered that when I had been working with that pattern I had learned that I could go ahead and top stitch. Unfortunately with this material it's not a knit, so I did need to make sure that the fabric was the fabric was not on the outside of the garment because it would fray and look terrible over time. So it did still need to be tucked in. And so I did make sure that this got a very thorough pressing, and I didn't baste it into place, though I probably would have been well to do so. I did pin it within an inch of its life. And then I did go ahead and top stitch along this line, and I top stitched all the way down to the bottom for continuity and to make sure to give it a really nice look. And I do have top stitching here as well, and I've got top stitching on the bottom. So I carried that through the garment so that it doesn't look out of place at all. I did not like this style at the beginning, but as I put it in properly, put the panel in properly, and I got it on, I now actually like it quite a bit. I think it looks nice. I do still think in the future, if I were to make another slip from this time period, I might make one of the slips that comes with a solid paneled front or a fishtail panel front that just has the dart in the side as opposed to having this. And the reason that I think I would do that is not because I don't like this style or because it was a terrible pain to put in, but actually because of this here. So in order to get this to nip into the body, because you remember we had that big gaping amount of fabric, I did add the elastic through this area, and it does create this kind of like puckering or gathering. I don't think it looks bad. It did exactly the job that I wanted it to do, and it makes this garment fit well. But I would love to have a garment that is smooth across this area that doesn't require that. And I don't really know if it's the pattern, or patterns, I guess I should say, because I have seen this on other patterns from the time period where we have this kind of gap of fabric. So it could be my body shape as well, or it just may have been popular at the time to cut the pattern out in a way that unfortunately caused that. Or maybe with the change or the differences in a historical undergarment versus a current undergarment, that might change. So I think I might try a different type of slip next time, but I do really like this one. And I like it not just as a slip, but as a nightgown. It's really lovely and comfortable and luscious, very sumptuous, because I did choose a heavier weight satin, which I wanted to ensure that I did because I want it to lay firmly down and against my body when I'm wearing it under one of those 1930s, 1940s dresses, which will have that lighter fabric. I was concerned that a slip made out of a lighter fabric might creep up over time, and that might not wear well. Nothing looks good when you're constantly fidgeting, trying to make sure everything is staying down. And I do, after having tried this on many times, think it will hold its own and it will stay down and stay in place, which is really what I wanted out of this. For this top panel piece, I don't know what the original instructions were. They're written in a different language. So I don't know if originally it is meant to just be a rolled hem, or if you are supposed to do bias binding. Of course, we all know that I tried that and it went terribly for me. It may have said in there to go ahead and cut interfacing out. That is what we inevitably went with. And I think for myself, that was absolutely the right decision. Not only because it created a nice smooth look that was not bulky at all, but it does still leave me with the opportunity that if later on I would like to add some kind of detailing to it, such as lace or ribbons, etc., I can still overlay that, hand stitch it down, or even machine stitch it down. But in the interim, this just lays beautifully flat and smooth, and under a dress it's going to be flat and smooth and lovely, and it's not going to interfere with the fabrics that are on top, and it's not going to be bulky and kind of blouse out or cause an unsightly lump under a dress. Now, in the images that they have, they are shown as having some detailing to them, and they are very lovely. But I think for myself, this simple, sleek, kind of uninhibited look is what I prefer. Something I should have done, and I knew I should have done, but I was so focused on redoing the top of this and ripping everything out, was I should have placed the straps in between the front piece and the interfacing. In doing that, I would have really secured the strap in place very, very nicely, and it would have hidden the raw edges of the strap and everything all together all at once. That was my mistake, and it was a rookie mistake. But I did hand stitch these. I top stitched them into place. I really took my time and made sure that they look really nice, and I think the stitches look really nice as they are. So I'm not overly concerned about it. But if you were going to make this and you were going to use an interfacing for this pattern, I would recommend sliding the strap between the front piece, the actual slip piece, and the interfacing. The straps are not a part of the pattern. And I think it's because a strap is a strap, right? It's, you just like make a tube of fabric, you flip it out, you press it down. And I think they're not a part of the pattern as well because it's a really personal decision. Do you like really wide straps? Do you like really skinny spaghetti straps? Or do you like straps that start out skinny and get kind of wider at the top? And so if this is a pattern that you're getting and you're rifling through everything, you're not going to find a separate rectangle for the straps. This is the strap width that I chose based on my preferences. It's just wide enough to hide a modern day brassiere, and it's nice and flat over the top of my shoulder so it doesn't dig in, and that's my preference. If you do not intend on ever wearing a brassiere underneath it, or you're intending on using strapless, of course you can go with any size strap that you like. Or if you are someone who finds that you have a heavier bust and straps tend to dig in, it gives you the opportunity. You could make some lovely, beautiful wide straps at the top that could sit more comfortably over your shoulders for yourself. Overall, I really like this pattern, and I really thought that the reproduction manufacturer on Etsy, that dealer, did a lovely job with the pattern itself. It printed really perfectly. It taped together very easily. I didn't have any problems with that. Overall, I would purchase from Reprinted Originals again because it was a pretty good printed pattern, and because they have a beautiful store on Etsy. They have a ton of patterns and in a variety of different eras. So it's not just 30s and 40s where, you know, there's older pieces, there's early 1900s, I believe there's late 1800s, so into the 19th century and the 20th century. And there are many, many patterns that are very, very tempting for myself, and I know I'll probably in time go on and buy them. I know that they will stay in my list of dealers because it did seem like a very accurate pattern. And if you go on to Repeated Originals and you check them out, you look at their instructions, and you do speak the proper language and you can read that language, or you're multilingual, you will have a head start over what I had, which was kind of just winging it and hoping that I could make this garment based on previous knowledge of garment construction. If you guys liked this video, if you like vintage patterns, if you like pattern reviews, if you like costumes and having fun in a sewing room, I would really love to have you along on my journey. Please, please hit that like and subscribe button down below, and I hope to see you again on my next adventure. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.